Well, it's been quite the couple of resets of raids. Things are starting to calm down now, and we've even got confirmation of when everything's going to launch for the first phase of content over the next 4 to 5 weeks, so we'll break all that down. I'm going to be completely honest up front, this video is going to be a little bit all over the place because I want to have a little talk through how MSV's been for me personally so far, when and what you need to know about the rest of Phase 1 content that's launching over the next few weeks, a little bit about Celestial Dungeons because the Celestial Dungeons are actually launching tomorrow in NA and Wednesday in EU, and I do actually have a sheet from one of the guys in the guild, Chunkinator. I'll put a link to his YouTube channel in the description below, but we have got a sheet knowing where some of the MSV items come from. Now, on the beta when he was compiling this sheet, a couple of the dungeons were bugged, so we just don't know what actually drops from those, and like anything, when we've tested it on the beta and then it transfers over to live, any of it's subject to change, but it does give you a good idea, hopefully, on where some of those big ticket items like the trinkets and weapons are actually dropping or was dropping on the beta. I'll put a link to the sheet in the description below as well, so you can just go and have a look at that at your own leisure. I did mention briefly in the video before that the world bosses had spawned early because of the massive cock-up when the raids actually launched. The one thing I didn't mention is actually the macro that I've put on screen here, which is just a really easy way just to quickly check to see if you have actually killed Galleon and Sha that week on that character. Now, if you've only got 1 or maybe 2 characters, I'm sure you don't need the macro because you'll just know whether you've killed them or not. But if you've got multiple characters, sometimes you can forget what you've done them on. I'll put the macro in the description below so you can just go and copy and paste it, but quite honestly, I just saw it on the Wowhead post about the world bosses spawning early and giving no loot. So firstly, MSV, how's it been? Now, honestly, for me personally, I find MSV to be actually the best raid of the opening tier. Heart of Fear has always been one of those where I don't find it very aesthetically pleasing, and I think some of the boss fights are just so gimmicky that overall it just ruins the raid as a whole, for me. I'm still looking forward to it because it drops better loot. But actually on a boss-by-boss basis, I do prefer MSV. I think things like Elegon are just so fun to do that it just makes the raid just a better raid for me personally in the first tier. Now really everything revolves around 2 bosses in MSV, and that's really Spirit Kings because Spirit Kings has got a lot of mechanics, there's a lot of one-shot potential there where people will just fall over and you'll be getting really frustrated. And then really Will of the Emperor, where on 10-man it is particularly comp dependent, and then on 25-man, even to a certain extent, depending on how you're handling the rages, is also pretty comp dependent. I do think on 10-man it's actually a lot more punishing than 25, because in 25-man, if you've got 2 druids, they can pretty much carry it. If you've got DK in there for mass grip as well, that makes life a lot easier. But the general way most people are now handling Will of the Emperor on 25-man heroic is literally just mass rooting the rages and keeping them rooted at all times, occasionally weaving in a mass grip from a DK to get them all stacked back up, and now all you've got to deal with is strengths and courages, and that just means when you need to soak those sparks as well, you've got so many cooldowns across your 25-man raid that it's just not even an issue. It does make it very clunky. I must admit, I would much rather be killing the rages, but we did try killing the rages, and we also then done it with the CC approach, and yeah, the CC approach is just better. Even though it only takes one thing going wrong and it's a wipe, but still, it's worth it. The thing is on 10-man though, where you're really limited on the amount of cooldowns you've got, you're definitely not going to be just mass CCing ads all the way through the fight. And yes, the ads die quicker, but still, you can't simply just take any 10 people that you want and make it work. Not in the levels of gear that we got at the moment. When you're at the levels of gear where you can actually just kill every spark as it comes, and you don't even need to worry about soaking, so you can just use cooldowns on the ones that you do need to soak because you've got cooldowns available, and when you've got no cooldowns available, you just kill every spark that comes from the mobs, because the sparks have not got that much health anyway. Now in our 10-man heroic, we do that sometimes. We kill a lot of sparks even though we are soaking a lot of sparks as well, and I honestly think probably this reset, maybe next reset, we'd have enough DPS in our 10-man because of all the gear upgrades we've got, weapons, trinkets, all of that stuff, to actually just be able to kill the sparks and not even worry about soaking. Now the thing with that obviously is the damage that you're putting into the sparks is damage you could be putting into the bosses, which makes the fight quicker, but the one thing it does remove when you have got the DPS to do that is the big dependency on a good composition, where you've got things like hunters, shadow priests, windwalker monks, or really a rogue. Because if you don't know already, a rogue can literally solo soak every single spark on 10 and 25-man, and yes, in 25-man as well. Obviously it would make the rogue's life a lot easier if he had another rogue soaking buddy with him on 25-man, because you've got ads coming from both sides, but yeah, rogue's really overpowered. As long as you're using elusiveness, a glyph of feint so it increases the duration of your feint, and then you're feinting every spark. Ideally, you want to also have a Disc Priest bubble on you before you actually pop a spark, just to be extra safe, but quite honestly, for any group that's doing 10-man heroic, if you have access to a rogue, take the rogue and just get them soaking, well, basically everything other than the rages. And I mean, even saying that, they could soak the rages, but it just makes it a bit more awkward because there's two together, so they'd have to soak one, and people would have to kite around and then soak the other one. So, but definitely on the strengths and courages, I would have the rogue soaking. I don't want to turn this into a boss guide or anything, but really, Will of the Emperor is the only boss that I'm hearing a lot of noise around that people are actually struggling on, particularly on 10-man. I do actually think people are having more problems with it on 10 heroic because of roster than on 25-man heroic, because yeah, I think it's a lot easier on 25 heroic, if I'm honest, but that's my 10-man bias coming out again, I suppose. And then the release schedule that we've now got. Now, I know this is kind of old news, but I'm really behind on videos purely because all I've been doing is No Life in Mist of Pandaria since the second the doors opened. But yeah, this week we're going to get Celestial Dungeons, where we're going to have access to the MSV Raid Finder gear, but it has now been relabeled to Celestial, so we're going to be able to get some pretty easy 476 gear, because you're going to get items from MSV and the Raid Finder version dropping from the last boss of each of these Celestial Dungeons, and you're going to get a currency where you can then go to the vendor and you can buy them as well. Now, from my experience on the beta, I can tell you that the Celestial Dungeons are not really any more difficult than the regular heroics, because yes, while everything in there has got more health, it deals more damage and also has the odd boss ability from Heart of Fear, you'll get a massive buff from one of the Celestials. So you've got Yulon for your casters, you've got Nizual for your tanks, you've got Chi-Ji for your healers, or if you're a Disc Priest or a Mistweaver monk, let's say, that's fist weaving, you probably still want to use Yulon anyway, which is the DPS one, because it does like an insane damage over time effect and increases the amount of magic damage they take as well. And then of course you've got Zuen for your strength and agility users. Now, not only does this give you a really big amount of your primary stat, you also then get a secondary ability like mini chain lightnings that's going off if you're using Zuen, or as I mentioned before, the dot that goes on if you're using Yulon. Now, like I mentioned, as long as the loot tables haven't changed since the beta, we do know where some of the important items come from. So things like the fist weapons that come from Scottejaye, these are actually going to be dropping from the last boss in Temple of the Jade Serpent. Oh, we got things like Torch of the Celestial Spark and Light of the Cosmos that come from Elegon. These are dropping from Scarlet Monastery. Again, this sheet isn't complete, and until they go live tomorrow, we can't even confirm its accuracy. So assuming that it hasn't changed since the beta, because I don't really see why it would have, it'll give you a good idea where some of the items are anyway, and then you can fill in the blanks as you're doing them tomorrow and let me know where the rest come from. So we've got a week of these Celestials where we're going to be able to get all of those missing MSV items, but just in their Raid Finder version, and then next week on Thursday, a global release of Heart of Fear. It's just a few days of Heart of Fear, and then at reset, Sha of Anger and Galleon drop tier 14 gear. I assume they just mean Sha, because Galleon's never dropped tier 14 gear, but Sha of Anger will be dropping tier 14. And then outside of the Celestial Heart of Fear gear coming on September the 2nd, it's going to be September the 4th on the Thursday again. Globally, we're going to get Terrace of Endless Springs unlock. So while they didn't answer in a developer interview whether we was going to get the raid separate, because I did ask, we now know that we are. And we're getting a couple of weeks of Heart of Fear before we get Terrace, and I don't see that as a bad thing. And the way it's working out as well means you haven't got to get super lucky with raid gear, because you're going to be able to farm out all of the previous raid's gear before the next one comes. So before Terrace launches, we're going to get a couple of days of being able to get Heart of Fear LFR gear, or I should call it Celestial gear because it is Celestial gear, it's been relabeled, remember. But we're going to be able to fill in any things that we missed from Heart of Fear before Terrace opens by just spamming Celestial Dungeons again, so happy days. Now, the one thing I don't know, nor have I seen whether it's confirmed or not, is what actually happens to the other gear when the new stuff starts dropping. So when you go into a Celestial Dungeon, are you going to be able to still get the MSV gear when Heart of Fear gears drop in? Is it just going to mean that there's more loot coming from each boss? So a couple of bits from each boss, 2 from MSV, 2 from Heart of Fear, for example, or 1 from each. And then when Terrace comes and we start getting that gear as well, what's happening? Because some of the trinkets, obviously like the Elegon trinket, for example, for casters, you're still going to want that. Like, you're going to want that on your ults. So even when the Terrace gear is dropping in the Celestial Dungeons, we still want the MSV gear dropping as well. So I'm kind of guessing that you're just going to kill a boss and it's going to drop a crap load of loot when it's all available, but time will tell. If it's not and you're still only going to get like 1 piece of tier and 1 piece of loot, for example, it might just be 1 of 6 pieces, because it looks like each boss is dropping 2 items from each raid. So, yeah, it could just be that as well. And then finally on September the 16th, we're going to get Celestial Dungeons dropping the Terrace of Endless Springs gear as well. And it's at that point where we have all content available. Now, how long we're going to be in this phase by that point, I don't know. I would imagine once Terrace opens, we're going to have a couple of months at least, even though by the time we actually get to Terrace being fully open and Terrace gear dropping from Celestial Dungeons, it would have already been like a couple of months since MSV launched, but it does mean that you can slowly phase phase out MSV as a raid team if you need to. Like, if you've already got everything you need from MSV, you don't need to go back just to do a full clear of the tier every week, because ultimately MSV is going to be dropping item levels lower than what you're going to get in Heart of Fear and Terrace, so you may get to a point where you're not doing it anyway. So yes, it's current content, but it doesn't mean that it's got to be done every week. So I'd still like to see by the time Terrace launches us having at least a couple of months with all the raids available, because quite honestly, Terrace, MSV, great raids. Heart of Fear, that one might feel like it's dragging on a little bit. I'll put a link in the description below, and I'll probably put it on at the end of the video as well, where I broke down the August Celestial stuff, so I go over the fragments and, well, basically everything that you can spend them on, because it's not just items. You can get commendations of service again, so you can get justice points, which I don't know what you're going to do with that, but great, I suppose. But overall, we've got a great 4 to 6 weeks ahead of us. I'm personally really excited for the Celestials. It is making me want to level more characters. All I want now is Blizzard to reduce the XP requirement. They should go post 5.3 XP values now, or give us Joyous Journeys or something, because it's the perfect time with the Celestial Dungeons opening for us to have ults to go and actually do them with. But on the basis, like, I've got 4 level 90s, and I can't bring myself to do another character. Like, I genuinely want to. I've got loads of characters that I want to level up, but it's just so boring. Even when I'm boosting myself, like some of you may know if you saw my last video where I'm boosting in Town Long Steps, I still just can't be bothered. So as always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Make sure you come check me out over on Kick, streaming pretty much every day and raiding every day, doing PvP every day. Like, yeah, just basically doing everything that you can think of every day. Links in the description below to Kick, to Rested XP if you want to pick up a Rested XP guide, to Chunk's channel where you can also find that sheet. And I'll see you on the next one.